What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. Guys, real quick, if you're serious about scaling your property investments, then you need to check out my Elite Property Accelerator. Whether you are stuck on raising capital or structuring deals, or indeed just finding the right opportunity, this is the blueprint you need to take your portfolio and your finances to the next level. No fluff, just real world strategies that work. So guys, hit the link below. It says learn more, and I shall see you inside. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And this news came in today, and I feel it's sufficiently newsworthy that I did not want to wait and delay another couple of days. And so this is effectively my first hot take that I'm doing on the podcast. I only published an episode this morning, and here I am creating another episode. And so, yeah, it's some big news, and it involves an announcement from the Taoiseach. And for those of you listening from other jurisdictions, not Ireland, Taoiseach is the Prime Minister, effectively. And he said that the government is currently looking at the possibility that they will abolish rent pressure zones, or RPZs as they're known, at the end of 2025. And this is part of a significant shift towards more private investment in the housing sector. And this promises, potentially significant changes in things like rent control, private investment, and housing affordability. But what does it mean for landlords, tenants, and investors? And will it fix the rental crisis? Will it fix the housing crisis in general? And, the big question is probably, could it drive rents up even further? They're already pretty high as it is. So anyway, stick with me, and I'm going to break this down. I'm going to break it into a couple of sections. First, why the RPZ may be abolished, what the government plans to replace them with, reaction from landlords, tenant groups, and politicians, and then my take on whether or not this is a step in the right direction. So the RPZ, what are they? What were they supposed to do? They were introduced back in 2016. And at the time they placed a cap. I think actually at the time they were introduced, the cap was 4%, but it was subsequently reduced to 2%, or the rate of inflation, the prevailing rate of inflation. And whichever was the lower, that was the cap that you could increase the rents in that particular area. Now, the goal was to protect tenants from massive rent hikes that were being seen in high demand areas like Dublin and Cork. And since then, these rent pressure zones, there was only a couple of them at the time, that has now been expanded to a total of 65 areas across the country, and a total of 17 out of the 26 counties. And some of these were added as recently as December just gone, 2024. So it's interesting. In April of last year, 2024, episode number 204, I think it was, of my podcast, I talked about unintended consequences of government policy and how it can have this, effect that was never anticipated and never wanted, like an undesirable effect. And I listed a number of places around the world where the government policy was brought in for good reason at the time. But what it did was it brought this artificial cap or artificial control on the market, which skewed the market and actually damaged the market in the end. And so I listed out all these different places. And so I'll put a link down below if you want to go and check out episode 204. But it led to all sorts of problems. And things like, places would fall into disrepair and they would end up being kind of ghettoized and stuff. So anyway, RPZs, they are another example of exactly this. Like, it was something that was designed to protect the tenant, but it had the actual effect of driving out landlords. And by driving out landlords, that has reduced the amount of properties that are available to rent. Now, if a landlord that is renting his property puts it on the market, what I am seeing for the most part is that it will be somebody like a family that buys that property to live in. They are not buying it to rent it out. And so, whereas you might sort of say, well, it's good that the person is moving in and that they're going to be living there. Yes, I agree. But unless you're replacing a house that was rented with another house that is going to be rented, then you're losing one house that is rented. And so you're losing one more property in the rental supply. And the problem is if every single landlord decides that this is not working, this is, there's too many restrictions, I can't get the value on my property, and they decide to put it up for sale, then there's another property that is no longer in the rental market. It is instead bought by owner-occupiers. And so fewer houses going around available to rent. What does that do? Naturally, it makes them a scarcity, and whenever there's scarcity, it pushes prices up. It's kind of simple economics, even though it was not intended to take place. Now, what it has also done is it has discouraged investment in rental property. And so not that many people are excited at the idea. Like, I can speak to you as a guy that runs a training course for property investors, that a lot of people that are inside, they're kind of scratching their heads at times, certainly looking in certain areas. They're like, they can't make sense of it as a standard buy to let. That's why they're looking at things like HMO and things like that to try to increase the rental value of the property. And so there's various things that are going on, but it's just the market has just been drying up very, very rapidly of landlords that are looking to do traditional buy to let. Now, what it's also done is it has not stopped the rental increases, because, as I mentioned, with fewer properties on the market, it means that there's a greater number of people that are going after the properties. And you might sort of say, well, if there's a rental cap, how does that work? Well, the way it works is that the landlord who owns a property that has this cap on it, they're unable to increase their rent. So a good example would be the street that I used to live in. There was a property that across the street, and the rent there was like $1,600, and the rent, they couldn't increase it more than 2%. But then a person that bought a house that had not been rented before that was not under any restriction, because there was no previous rental price. And when that person put it on the market, he was able to get $3,000 a month for it. So you got the same street, $1,600 for one property, $3,000 for another, and it's the person who has the lower value property or the lower rental income coming in, they have no way of getting it up unless they do various dramatic things, like they leave it empty for 2 years or they do a massive refurbishment on it. And so the easiest thing, just put it on the market and sell it. And they did that, and then there was one less property for rent, and the property getting $3,000 a month, there was more people going after that property, and so naturally they were able to it pushed the prices, and it pushed the numbers of people looking for property after that one small number that are left. So it's classic economics, supply and demand. Anyway, all of this has gone terribly wrong for the government. They what was intended to keep a cap on prices, people just figure out ways to kind of bypass that. And it's not that they're doing anything wrong, it's just that there are naturally, the market will always find a level. And the way it's done is some people are winners, some people are losers. The people that can't get the rent up, they just decide, I'm getting out of here, and it's too much hassle, and they leave. Whereas other people, they might sort of, perhaps they're handy with their hands and they're able to do the big refurb and the extension, and then they're able to go and get the restrictions removed. Or if you're able to turn your house into a more sustainable house, if you're able to raise it from, say, a level D BER up to a level B BER, we'll say. If it's jumped a number of levels of BER, then that also qualifies for removing the cap and it going to the market rent. Anyway, all of this stuff has meant that prices for renting a property have just shot up, and it's just made it even more crazy, these imbalances that I mentioned. And so the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, said today in the news that it is time for a change. And so we have to ask that, like, what is going to happen? The government, what they're saying is they're set to explore an alternative system before the RPZs expire at the end of 2025. Private investment in the sector is drying up, according to the government. Finally, they recognise this. I know several people that have been saying this for a long time, and every time somebody said it, you had various parties, political opposition parties, and you had various other kind of industry lobbyists that were against increases would be saying, oh, of course you say that, but it's not really the case. But it is the case. And finally, it's recognised that the amount of properties that are available to rent on the market are it's so small that it's just creating this massive imbalance, and people just can't find property to rent. Most of the time, if the big corporates that are hiring lots of people, there's almost full employment in Ireland at the moment. And so what they're doing is they're reaching out across into the EU, and they're finding good applicants there for jobs, and they're saying, come and work for us. And the person says, oh, can you help me with the accommodation? No, we can't. And then the job is dropped. And so it's starting to impact the economy. It's starting to impact everything. Now, the rental market needs stability. You can't have a situation where all of this political kind of back and forth drives decision making, because at the end of the day, big funds that are coming into the country and they're looking at making investments into 20-year investments and things like that. Those guys can't be waiting to see which party's in power, whether our investment is going to fall in value as soon as a new party comes into power. So those guys, they see all of this political backstabbing and stuff that's going on, and they're basically kind of saying, you know what, it's a little bit too risky. Let's just stay out of the market. We can get plenty of great returns in other markets. And so suddenly there's nobody piling into the market the way we saw it happening back in 2021 and stuff. So the rental sector is deteriorating. We need, as in the government needs to pivot towards encouraging more private investment in housing. In short, bringing landlords and institutional investors back into the market. Now, in my eyes, this is good news. It's the only way that we're going to fix some of the housing problem that we have. The good news in my eyes is, but then again, you can kind of predict what's going to happen. The reaction from the different parties and stuff like that it's so predictable, and that really frustrates me. One of the things that frustrates me is the bad name that landlords get. Like, I have an active social media profile, and if I go out and I talk about, renting property and landlords and all that, the amount of people that are in there with negative things like, they don't seem to care that you're actually providing a service. If you're renting out a property, you're providing a service to somebody who needs to rent that property. And instead you're being called a scumbag and things like that. And so there is definitely, there's kind of a taint on the name of, or on the occupation of being a landlord. And anyway, I'll tell you what some of the reaction has been from the market. My good friend, Mary Conway, who is the chairperson of the IPOA, the Irish Property Owners Association, she said that they are thrilled at the news, as they've been saying for several years that the RPZs are pushing landlords out of the market. And, at the end of the day, fewer homes to rent means higher rents. It's as simple as that. They feel the market will find its natural level when it's not being artificially capped or set. Now, of course, tenant groups, and I'm not saying tenant groups are in any way bad or anything like that. They represent their constituents, which are people who rent, and they are predictably concerned at any kind of change in the way the market is run. But they are saying that, they're urging that serious data collection and analysis is going to be required to come up with a workable solution or an alternative. I think that is a good measured response. Like, they're never going to be out there, dancing and singing and stuff like that. But they do know themselves that the market is broken. If you look at, there's photographs online of properties for rent and a line of maybe 80 people standing to try and have a chance at renting that property. One property, 80 people standing at it. And I know anecdotal evidence from agents and friends of mine that they put a house on the market and they say within 2 hours they have 100 inquiries. So, but political party, opposition parties, very predictable. This is one of these things where they come out with all of the scare tactics and they come up with words like there's going to be an explosion in rents and that this is all extremely worrying. And they also accusing the government of caving to industry lobbyists. It's a classic divide, and and the unfortunate thing is this classic divide is actually what's causing part of the problem. Is that if you go and look at some of these countries where they don't have a new power or a new government being voted in every 4 years, they can take a much longer term view. Places like in the Middle East, you've got places like Dubai or whatever. Those guys can take a 10 and a 20 year view and they can say, right, here's what we're going to do and we're going to just do it. And sure enough, it works in those places. And that's because they're not thinking about the popularity or the unpopularity of the decision. They're just thinking about, let's go and do what needs to be done in order to, have the accommodation there for a growing population. Whereas if you're turning this into a political exercise and all you're interested in doing is scoring points against the opposition or the party that's in power, then it's always going to be guys trying to kind of find cover and sort of saying, we're going to do this. And if there's a whole load of complaints about it, oh no, we're not going to do that. You misunderstood me. I'm going to do this instead. And it just means that nobody has any clarity about what's going to happen. So what is the solution? There has been a mention of the word referenced rents and a referenced rent system. But what does this actually look like in practice? Rents would be benchmarked against similar properties in the same area, and they would be reviewed at regular intervals to keep pace with market conditions. Then what they would do is they would introduce a cap at that referenced rate. And so it would be not that there's 2% as the max it can increase. It just means that if the average in that area is, we'll say, $2,900 a month, then that will be the max that you're able to get to. And I think that seems to be how it's going to be working. But like all these things, the devil is in the detail. I understand factors like management costs, interest rates, household income would also need to be considered. But on paper, it does sound like a flexible, market-driven approach. And without a doubt, artificially capping rents never worked. And just go back and have a listen to that episode I mentioned earlier, the unintended consequences, for all the examples around the world. You've got New York, you've got Germany, you've got England. Like there's so many examples where this, and Sweden as well, as far as I can recall. All of these countries where they brought it in for a particular reason to try to prevent a certain thing happening, and it had this unintended consequence, which either ghettoized the area or resulted in no more investment in the area. And so it ended up pushing up prices, or it ended up people retaining these really low, artificially low. And so nobody wanted to invest in the property. And so the landlords just allowed it to turn into a bit of a slum, because what's the point spending money? I can't get a better return with any money that I spend. Now, there is a catch with all of this. For this to work, it's going to need a massive amount of data and transparency. And the question is, can the government actually pull that off? Anytime, obviously nowadays we have artificial intelligence and that it's possible that we can create systems that will actually do this. But the question will be, do the unions and the powers that be, will they allow something like artificial intelligence be used in this process? Or is it going to be one of these things where, no, our party, our union members have to be given the first chance and it's going to all be paperwork driven and stuff? I don't know. That's where this thing could really go wrong badly. What's my take on the whole issue? First of all, first question in my mind is, will this fix the market? And I think its simple answer is no. It's not going to fix the market, because the market is not just the rental market. The market is the housing market in general. But if you consider the rental market is absolutely broken at the moment, then I think this is definitely a new direction. It's worth giving it a try. If landlords start investing in the market again, well, then that will increase the amount of demand. It'll increase the amount of supply in the market, and hopefully that will satisfy the demand. But it's going to take a while. Like, this won't be an overnight thing. And you'd have to wonder, do people that have money to invest, do they say, oh, let's all pile into the market now? Or is this one of these things that's going to be changed in a year or two and then we're going to suddenly be penalised again? That's the bit that the government was talking about, where they need the certainty, and they need to know that this is not going to be changing on a frequent basis. Anyway, as long as rents are shooting up, I think we have to try and do something about it. If the focus is only on people who want to buy a property, then what's going to happen is the people that choose to rent, and there's a lot of reasons why you may choose to rent. You may be somebody who has not gathered up your deposit yet. You might be somebody who is taking a job in a certain area that you don't live in. So let's say you're coming up, you live in a part of the country and you're coming to Dublin for a job. Are you expected to arrive in Dublin and just immediately start buying a property? No, because first of all, you don't know, are you going to retain that job long term? Do you want to go and commit to a mortgage or something like that? So lots and lots of people rent for legitimate reasons. It's not simply that they can't afford to buy. And then obviously there's a lot of people out there who may not be able to qualify for a mortgage yet. And so why would we want to penalise those people by driving up rental prices? The focus always seems to be on the people that are buying a home. And it's understandable that if you have kids and all that kind of stuff, that is obviously a major focus for you. But what about the people that are renting that have kids in that area and they can't find a property and they're unable to rent anything? So it's a difficult one. I think the jury is out on this whole idea of referenced rents until such time as we see the details on how it's all going to work. I'm going to hold a judgment. The actual issue, in my opinion, is housing supply. We need more houses under construction, full stop. We need more land being zoned. We need faster and more reliable planning process, one that cannot be hijacked by groups that are against a certain thing or by neighbours that are against a certain thing. Like, when we go for planning on something, it can be months, if not years, until you get a decision. And that is no way to run a business. And so it's very difficult to predict when and how many houses you're going to be able to deliver. Without housings, we're never going to have enough homes to buy, never enough homes to rent, never enough homes for social and affordable, never enough homes for students, for elderly, and for people that need assistance. And so all of these things, to achieve all of these ends, it is going to be necessary to incentivize investors coming back into the market. And does this mean tax breaks? Maybe it does, although I certainly doubt that that's something that the government will be bringing in, because once again, the opposition parties will have a field day. But if you go back and look at the 1990s, when places like Temple Bar were developed, it was a bit of a no-go area, and it was tax breaks that got all of that place gentrified and turned into a living area. One thing's clear: the small investor, the small landlord, has been pulling out of the market for several years. And also, whilst the big institutional players are important, and those guys build 200, 300, 400 unit schemes, I think the small portfolio owner has an important part to play. Anyway, what do you guys think? Happy if you could send me a message with your thoughts on it. But look, that's my hot take. I wanted to get this out there quickly. Normal programming resumes tomorrow, and I shall see you in the next episode. Hey guys, if you're listening to this and thinking, I'd love to invest in property, but I don't even know where to start, well, I've got you covered. I am launching the Property Starter Pack on the 1st of March. It's designed specifically for beginners. There's no jargon. There is no overwhelm. It's just a step-by-step plan to buying your first property, whether that's your home or an investment property. You want to do that with confidence. And here's the kicker. The first 100 people to pre-register are going to get an exclusive early bird discount. And so I've put a link below to register your interest. And so find that in the show notes below and secure your spot. Now, back on with the episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful in any way, could I please ask you to take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. There is no algorithm for the podcast, and so the only way we can get other people to find out about it is when it's shared by you. So if you can do that, it'd be great. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover on future episodes, please connect with me via the school community or just send me a message on Instagram or wherever. You'll see the links in the show notes below. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the projects that I'm working on by signing up for my weekly newsletter, and you'll find a link below in the show notes for that too. That's all for now, guys. I'll see you back here same time next week.